how many of you are parents of elementary school kids? A lot of you. Any parents of preschoolers? Okay, a few of you. Middle school? A bunch. High school? Okay, college? The real survivors? All right. Okay, I also like to know anyone who are professionals in this field. So do I have any people, first of all, who are teachers? A bunch. Okay, any neuropsychologists? Okay. Any other pediatricians? No? Any OTs, occupational therapists? Okay. Physical therapists? Speech pathologists? Okay. Any other professions that I didn't mention? Okay. Sorry? Social worker, thank you. Social workers? Therapists? Okay. All right, great. We have a lot of you and a lot of parents, so you're in the right place. So today we are going to talk about kind of my top 10 strategies for parenting kids with ADHD. You're going to walk out of here with a broad overview. I can tell you that there's a lot more to know, but I want to make this available to you. And most importantly, at the end, I always leave plenty of time for any questions you have. But if you have a question during my presentation, feel free to just raise your hand. And if I feel like we're getting off course, I'll redirect us, but there'll be plenty of time for your questions. Anything goes, okay? I want you to feel comfortable. This is a safe place to ask your questions. So, and my objective is, as I said, to give you an overview of what ADHD really is. And there we go. So we're going to start with ADHD, the basics. When I say the basics, what do you think of when you think of ADHD? Anyone want to tell me? What do you think of? Yes?
Hyper.
Hyper. What else?
Pinball machine.
Pinball machine. That's a great one. What else?
Oppositional.
Oppositional. We'll talk about that a little bit.
Inattentive.
Inattentive. Yep.
Poor impulse control.
Poor impulse control. Yeah. Those are big ones. Yeah.
Unable to focus.
Unable to focus. Yeah. I would say that's a lot of the basics. Okay. What we need to know is that ADHD is a complex neurobiological condition. Okay, that's some of the latest terminology that we use. It's highly hereditary, which should come as no surprise to many of you sitting here, because I happen to know many of you sitting here probably, if you didn't know before, probably you're realizing that maybe you have ADHD yourself, if you're here for your child. So we can talk about that. And approximately 9.5% of school-age children now, we believe, have ADHD. That's a pretty large number. What does that mean in school? That means pretty much in every class, there's at least one child with ADHD. And you'll see why that's really important to know. 2 to 4% of adults have been diagnosed with ADHD. There are a lot more out there who have not been diagnosed with ADHD, who probably could be. 85%, in fact, of adults with ADHD are undiagnosed, okay? And would probably qualify for treatment if they went through the testing. So, the debate is over, and I really want you to know that. With all the mythology that's out there, ADHD is real. You can see it in the brain scan. I do not suggest spending the thousands of dollars it would cost to do a brain scan, but you can see it. Okay? You can't have a little ADHD. You're not having an ADHD moment. Okay? Right? That's what you hear now. Okay? ADHD is real. It's a neurobiological disorder. And all of the mainstream medical organizations and psychological organizations will actually back that up. So, there are 3 presentations of ADHD. Now, when I say 3 presentations, we didn't used to call it presentations. Before the latest DSM. Any of you familiar with what the DSM is? That's right. The Diagnostic, I can never say this straight, Diagnostic Statistical Manual. That's that big gray book that's on the doctor's desk, okay? And the latest DSM is the DSM-5, and that came out in May of this year. So we are now calling this presentations of ADHD. So the main presentations, predominantly inattentive, and this is previously what we thought of as ADD. Okay? Then we have predominantly hyperactive and impulsive presentation, which would be what we call a lot of those kids that are bouncing off the walls, okay? And then we have the combined presentation, where you've got a little bit of all of the joy, okay? This is working a little slower. I guess I have to point that way. Okay. So let's talk about what lies beneath the iceberg. And what I mean by that is, if you think of ADHD primarily as the inattentive, the hyperactive, and the impulsive, right? Because those are the three main diagnostic criteria, all right? Those are behaviors you can see, but it's what lies beneath that makes parenting so challenging. We're going to talk about a few of those things tonight. And one of the things that lies beneath is executive functioning. Now, I'll explain what this is a little bit, but how many of you are familiar with that term, executive functions? Okay, just so you know what I see, I'm seeing about a third, maybe even a fourth, okay? Executive functions are something we started talking about in the last 5 to 10 years. In fact, so much of what we know about ADHD we've really learned in the last 10 years or so. So executive functions are housed in the prefrontal cortex. That's the front part of your brain. I'm not going to get too scientific. Fortunately, we have medical people to do that. But the prefrontal cortex, where your executive functions are, that's the last part of your brain to develop. And in general, you're developed at about age 25 to 30. So when you think about what the executive functions are, you start to think about all those teenagers walking out there making all these life-changing decisions. It gets a little scary. So executive functions, those have to do with how you do what you intend to do. Things like time management, planning, organizing, initiating. Does this sound like challenges some of your kids have? Okay, I'm seeing this. Okay, right? So what we now know is that ADHD is an executive function disorder. That you cannot have ADHD without having deficits in your executive function skills. You can have deficits in executive function skills without having ADHD. Okay, so it doesn't go both ways.
How was that measured? To be 30%?
That's a great question. The science is still relatively new. That's really our approximation based on what we see. Okay, so when I say 30%, it's a range. It's not like all of a sudden, okay, the kid got older, now he has it all. In fact, some people believe that not everyone does develop their executive functions perfectly. Many of you adults probably know that yourselves, and that's what we have other people to help us for, and other supports to help us with. The other thing that's really big, and I heard someone mention oppositional behavior, and I heard some other things about emotions, deficits in emotional self-regulation. That's one of the hugest things that goes on for people with ADHD. It's not that their emotions are, for lack of a better word, wrong or inappropriate. This is not a mood disorder in that way. It just means that their ability to regulate their emotions is challenging. These are the kids that can go from 0 to 100 on a dime. You're all going, yeah, that's my kid, right? Yeah. Okay? What does it feel like? Has anyone ever had someone describe what it feels like to have ADHD, or anyone who has it themselves want to describe? Yes?
That's one I heard, because way back when it was called hyperactivity.
That's true.
That's what I had, I have, was you're trying to juggle 3 balls, people are talking to you, and you're also trying to hammer a nail in.
That is great. Did you all hear that? It's like juggling 3 balls, you're trying to pay attention to something, and you're still trying to hammer something, hammer a nail. Yeah, there's just so much going on, right? So it's not that they can't pay attention, it's that they're paying attention to a lot of things. So the whole name for this disorder doesn't really make much sense, does it? Because we already said, let's see, it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We already know that some of the people don't have hyperactivity, right?
Right.
And now we know that this isn't a deficit in attention. It's a deficit in the ability to regulate attention. Okay? By the way, does anyone know, let's see, we started calling this ADHD in about 1994. When that DSM came out, they changed it to ADHD. Before that, it was ADD, right? But it's still the same thing. People walk around and they say, oh, I don't have ADHD, I have ADD. Well, today, you have ADHD, you just don't have the hyperactivity, okay? But does anyone know what we used to call this before we called this ADD? Sorry?
Normal.
Normal. No, these would be people that weren't normal, right? Crazy. Crazy.
Yeah.
What do we used to say? He was crazy. What else?
Bratty.
Bratty? Yeah. Lazy. What else? Hyperactive, right? Stupid, unfortunately.
Bad kid in the class.
Huh?
The bad kid in
The
the
bad
class.
kid in the class, yeah. Do you know what it was technically called? Minimal brain dysfunction. So we've come a long way. We still need to go a little further though, don't we? Okay? So, what does it feel like? So we talked about that hyperactivity. Okay, I've heard people say that it's like having a gerbil in your head, sort of going around one of those wheels. Okay? It's not easy. And one of the things you have to realize is it is real. So, my first tip is get educated about ADHD. Learn as much as you can. I do a 7-session parent coaching workshop series where I work with parents just like you, and we start off the first week, and that hour and a half is all about ADHD. So I promise you there's still a lot more that you need to know, because to be able to parent your child, you need to be able to sit in their place and understand what their experience is. It's really important. So the second thing is diagnosis and treatment. And Dr. Firestein did a great job of explaining a lot of what goes on. I'm going to go a little bit further and just say, what is in a proper diagnosis? Does anyone know what a proper diagnosis includes? Yes?
Testing with teachers, parents,
Testing with teachers and parents, yeah.
You want to gather information across environments?
In cross environments. In fact, for it to be ADHD, you have to see it in 2 or more settings. A kid can't just have ADHD at home. But it might look that way sometimes because kids will present so differently in school, right? How many of you, when you go to those teacher conferences, the teacher says, "Oh, Johnny's fine," right? You know, which the implication is what?
You're crazy.
You just don't know how to parent him, right? But I promise, it's not just that you don't know how to parent him, it's that they're showing up differently at school, right? So yes, you need to see things across 2 settings, yes?
You know, if they can't control their impulse.
I'm sorry, a little louder.
If they can't control their impulsivity at home, how are they able to control it in school if there's an inability?
That's a beautiful question. Did you all hear that?
No.
If they can't control their impulsivity, at school,
Right.
At home.
at home,
I mean, at home.
how are they,
And-
or vice versa? If they can control in one place, why can't they control it in other places?
Peer models.
Huh?
Peer models.
Peer models,
Behavior modifications.
sometimes. Sometimes the structure. Sometimes it's just their anxiety, right? They keep it together for just so long, and then they come home and it's like they unwound, right? Or the opposite can happen. Mom at home knows how to really set up the environment and really work things really well, but without those supports in place at school, things fall apart. So that's why I said you really have to know that you're diagnosing what you're diagnosing. It's important to not just make assumptions. Back in the day, I can tell you, and fortunately, and I truly mean this was my kid's pediatric practice, but back in the day, okay, it used to be you could go to a pediatrician and just say, my kid is just acting out and hyper, and I'm getting reports from schools, and the pediatrician might have back then just said, well, you know what, sounds like it might be ADHD, here you go. Okay? That's not what we do these days, that's not a diagnosis. Okay? For a diagnosis, you need to see the testing, you need to see it in different places, and you also need to, and this is one of the most important things, do a full family history. Because you want to be able to rule out and rule in many different things. Okay? You need to know what's going on in the family. Maybe you want to see, are there additional stressors? Okay? You need to look at some medical aspects. Does anyone know what could mimic ADHD? What kind of medical things can mimic ADHD? Yeah.
Lyme disease.
Lyme, yes.
Apnea.
Sleep apnea, absolutely. If a child has sleep apnea and hasn't been sleeping very well, right? How do you think their attention's going to be? How are you guys on 3 nights of no sleep? I'm not so good, right? Anyone else know anything? Yes?
Crohn's.
Crohn's, yep. Thyroid condition, okay? So it's very important that you really know what you're looking at. And that's why a proper diagnosis really matters. Okay? So who can diagnose? Who can diagnose ADHD? I've already said certainly the pediatricians, and I'm going to say something, okay? It is very important that you make sure that that pediatrician, and I happen to know that this practice they do, they have some people that have gone the extra mile, because in medical school, I don't know what goes on now, but years ago in medical school, they were not teaching about how to diagnose ADHD to the pediatricians. And I'll tell you, I have a master's in counseling psychology from a long time ago, okay, from a very nice school. Never heard the word ADHD. Never heard the word ADHD or ADD, okay? It wasn't something that many of us learned in our schooling. In fact, I can tell you, of the educators here, has any educator here, did you learn about ADHD in school?
Yes.
Maybe a little bit, maybe probably as much as I'm telling you tonight. I can tell you that my daughter's in school and she's going to be a teacher, God bless her, and I know that she's learned more from the work that I've done than she's learned in school, and that's today. So it is very important that the people that you go to diagnose are currently educated about ADHD. So who can do the diagnosis? What category of professional?
Psychiatrist.
Sorry?
Psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist, who else?
Neurologist.
Neurologist,
Therapist.
therapist, social worker, yeah, pediatrician, of course, nurse practitioner,
Licensed psychologist.
licensed psychologist. So the thing is, it's not regulated the category of who can diagnose. That's why it's incumbent to you to make sure the person you go to truly is an expert in the field of ADHD. Because lots of different professionals can do the diagnostic work. If your child has any kind of learning issues, then you're definitely going to want to go the extra mile and perhaps get a neuropsych eval. Unfortunately, and this is why it's so important that we really rally around and improve the care, the mental health care in our society, it is thousands of dollars. And very often it is out of pocket, which is really a hardship for a lot of people. So that's just that area.
Why is that?
Why is that? Oh, discussion for another night. I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
The answer is I don't know. I know that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into a good diagnostic workup. Okay, why it's not covered by insurance, that's another whole
Just they don't
animal.
consider a medical necessity.
Yeah.
Is it a necessity to
So,
get that?
we talked about what's involved in the diagnosis. What makes up a treatment plan? What makes up a treatment plan? Well, the first thing that makes up a treatment plan is sometimes medication. But I don't mean that that's the first thing, but it is one of the components. I'm not going to talk too much about medication, although if people do have questions, in general questions, not specific to your child if you don't mind, but general questions about medication, I will take that at the end. But I can tell you that medication, they have found for many kids, in fact, statistically it's about 80% of kids can do well on medication. Having said that, it's not for everyone, and it's a very personal decision. When people call me up and they say, you know what, my kid was just diagnosed with ADHD and I'm not putting him on meds, will you still work with me? My answer is of course. Because what I do is I do parent education. I'm a certified ADHD coach. What that means is I've had years of training, not just in life coaching, but in specifically ADHD in the brain. I've been going to every conference about ADHD and learning in the brain for the last 5 or so years. I probably learned what there is out there to learn, but the point is that it's important to know that when you think about medication, it is something to consider, but you need to know more, okay?
Would that medication work for adults with that?
Absolutely. The question was, do they work for adults? Yes, the answer is absolutely. In fact, there are many adults I know who take their medication on a regular basis. There are some adults I know who take it when they need to. For instance, I know a lawyer, and when he's preparing for a case, he's going to take his medication because it's very hard for him to sit and focus and do what he needs to do. But when he's trying the case, he doesn't take his meds. So adults get to play around with that a little bit more. The other thing that's involved in treatment, get this going again, is sometimes therapy. Okay? Why is therapy valuable? Not so you can talk to the kid and say, well, why can't you focus? True story, I have had therapists contact me and say, tell me, what advice do you give? Because I have a client, a patient who's really having a hard time focusing, and what should I tell him? Well, maybe that he needs to get a diagnosis and see if he has ADHD. All the talking in the world is not going to help someone figure out why they can't focus. What we can do is help them focus. Okay, we can help them with setting up some strategies and tools and possibly medication. And coaching. Coaching is a relatively new field. Okay, ADHD coaching's probably been around for, I'm going to say between 10 and 15 years. Okay, and what coaching is, it doesn't look at the whys and the what's going on in the family system. What it does look at is support and tips and tools and strategy to help you with where you are and help with accountability. So that's what coaching is, and coaching is very supportive for people who have ADHD, especially, by the way, for adults. I have people who work with me who work specifically with adults who have ADHD because it's not easy managing your job, managing your life, managing your marriage and everything else if you have untreated, undiagnosed ADHD. But then once you get the diagnosis, there's so much you can do. All right, let's look at number 3. Let's look at number 3. Oh, I'm sorry, parent education. I forgot to say that one. Ooh, that would have been bad. Parent education, as I said, the first slide, that is truly the most important thing you can do. And I think you understand more now, right? Okay, why that's so important? All right, your perspective. Why am I highlighting your perspective? The thing is, I want you, first of all, to have a disability perspective. Why do I say disability in small letters? Anyone? Why do you think I say it in small letters?
You don't want to focus on the negative, like just focusing on the positive.
Yeah, you don't want to focus on the negative. You really don't. But the fact of the matter is, this is a disability. It is not easy for the people who have ADHD. Okay? So we do need to have a disability perspective. We do need to have the perspective that, you know what, I get that this is real for you, that you can't just, one of the things I always say is, you can't punish the disability. You can't say, look, I know you have a hard time focusing, but you got to just hurry up and do it. Does that work? It doesn't work so well, right? Okay. So your perspective is very important. You want to see the strengths and not just the weaknesses. And you want to make time for their strengths and not just focus on their weaknesses. You want to see the world through their eyes. You want to really try to build up your empathy for them and your understanding of what their experience is. And unconditional love to offset those reprimands and those reminders. These kids go through the day, oh my goodness.
Oh my.
How many times a day do you think they hear no, don't do this, do that, don't do that, do this, right? All day long? This is what I'm seeing from you guys, right? Yeah. And my own personal philosophy is parent the child you have. Not the child you wish you had. Not the child you would have if you just were parenting the way your mother-in-law said you should. Okay? Yeah. You got to parent the child you have. And then, well, this is really frustrating, isn't it? Let's see. There we go. Catching on. Okay. Parenting skills. What does it take to parent a kid with ADHD? Well, here's the thing. Logic. Have you guys tried? Has anyone tried logic? How's that working for you? Not so good, right? Okay, so logic doesn't always work. And what about extra love? I'm sure you guys are out here instead of going to the movies, a few feet away, right? Extra love is really important for these kids, but it's still not enough. Okay, I've never met a parent who doesn't genuinely love their kid and just doesn't know what to do, right? And patience is crucial. But patience isn't always enough either, is it? And strictness and rules are really important. But the question is, and this is what I do in my workshop, what does it really mean to be strict? What are we being strict about? Are we enabling them? Or are we supporting them? Those are the biggest issues that we deal with. And I can't, I'd love to say tonight I'm going to give you all those answers, and I'm not trying to do a bait and switch on you, but it's so individual. But also there's so much you can do, there's so much to learn, there's so much philosophy that goes into how you parent this child. We need to really look at what does that mean, enable versus support. What are we enabling, what are we supporting? So I say that you need a black belt. You need actually a black belt in parenting. You need ADHD specific tips and tools and strategies and knowledge. Okay? Any question about that aspect? All right. Home environment. What should the home look like? Well, here's the thing, guys. Yeah, life inside their heads is very often chaotic and messy. It really is. They don't have an internal sense of time. So I'm going to take a moment to show you what this is. So let me explain about time. Kids with ADHD, adults with ADHD, are not necessarily as accurate in measuring the passage of time. They've done studies on this, where they said, okay, we want to see your sense of when time passes. So let's say 5 minutes. We're going to measure your sense of 5 minutes. And what they found is that people with ADHD, guess what? Not as accurate. So how many of you have said, hey, Johnny, do me a favor. Come downstairs for 5 minutes. And what happens 5 minutes later? Where's Johnny?
So upstairs.
Nowhere to be found. Right? The assumption is what? What do we assume is going on?
Not listening.
He's not listening. Right? But very often what's happening is it can be many things. He could be hyper-focused. He could be distracted. But he also just doesn't have a sense of 5 minutes. He really doesn't. So here's one real good tip. Yeah?
At what age should we expect a child, even without ADHD, to have that, like, know what 5 minutes is if they're not looking at a clock?
There are adults walking around who don't have a sense. Anyone know an adult who walks around who doesn't have a sense of time passing? Okay, so at what age? It's really developmental, and that's why we teach them time, but I'm going to show you something. How many of you have ever seen this? This is called a time timer. Okay, a few of you? Okay. This is a very low-tech object. It has a single battery in the back. Okay. What this is, and this, by the way, you could get this on Amazon or anywhere else. It's called Time Timer. It comes in all sorts of sizes. Okay. You could get it in 3x3, so you can keep it on their desk. In fact, when I teach in schools, I always encourage the teachers to please just get a box of these and just, let the kid just grab one and put it on their desk. Okay. You can get it as a wall clock. You could get it as an app on your smartphone. Okay, the smart boards, what are they called? The whiteboards, smart boards in the schools. They have that app, and unfortunately many teachers don't know that, but they have that app. So here's what it is. If I say, okay, Johnny, in 15 minutes we're going to be going, right? And you think, okay, I've given them a warning, I've said 15 minutes, right? And then 5 minutes later I'm going to see what? I'm going to say, hey, Johnny, now you have 10 minutes, okay? Still not helping Johnny. So here's what I have. So I'm going to set this for 15 minutes. And time is going to slowly just disappear. So he can see the passage of time. Okay? It's a great device. Very low tech. The other thing you can do is whenever you tell Johnny, you got to come down in 5 minutes. What's the thing you can do? If Johnny knows how to tell time, you can say, hey, Johnny, what time is it? It's 6:50. 6:50, okay, do me a favor. At 6:55, could you come downstairs? Okay? So we need to give them a way to measure time. You could have timers, okay? How many of you have a clock in your kid's bathroom? Uh-oh, look around. How is your kid supposed to know when they're supposed to get out of the bathroom? When that bus is coming? We've got to give them those. We've got to give them more of those tools. And the other thing I will tell you anecdotally, I've never seen research on this, but what I've found, many people with ADHD do not relate to an analog clock. You know where it says 12 o'clock, right? They relate to the digital clock. So think about the clocks you have around. It's not just them learning how to tell time. In fact, many kids will say, don't tell me it's 1/4 of, tell me what time it is. Right? You're laughing. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Someone had a hand up. Yes?
We use the iPad with the timer.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, you can see gradually, like the 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah, the iPads, yeah. There are many apps out there now. There are many different ways to help kids and help adults with time. Yes?
What happens when you set the timer
Good question, that comes up very often. Her question is, what happens when you set the timer and it heightens their anxiety? Not every strategy is going to work for every kid, but what you're going to do with that kid is say, hey, you know what, I see it makes you more anxious. Let's figure out something to do so that, you know, we can help you measure time and not, you know what I mean, it's not going to be a quick fix, but you're going to have to come up with some strategies around that. Yes?
I actually went to buy that clock and it was sold out on Amazon. And they had a suggestion about this other one. It was a digital, and you twisted it, and it started out on green. There was a green light.
Oh, the one that's a traffic light?
It looked like it, but it was just one button. And then as it got to like 10 minutes, it turned to yellow. And then
Right,
I was happy about it because my kids are elementary, so they were able to, when they got to the yellow, they knew they had to move a little bit quicker. And then when it got to the red, they knew,
You're in the red
wow,
zone.
I really had better move a lot quicker.
Yeah. Did you all hear that back up here? There are some other ways. Time timer is just one of them. There are some other ways of measuring time. And again, different kids, different strategies are going to work. The important thing that I want you to walk away with is we've got to give them a strategy. You can't just hold them responsible. Okay? All right. What else do we have here? Oh, yes. They need a calm environment. You guys all calm, right? House is fine? No stress? No? Okay, well, that's what we do in session 2 of my workshop. I can tell you we spend a whole lot of time talking about how to calm, why it's so hard, and what we're going to do about that. Yeah?
We go out of our way to make it a calm environment, but still...
It's still not working, huh?
Look at the eraser on the pencil. Like, there's nothing.
Yeah. It's very, very hard. And remember what I said at the very beginning. ADHD is deficits in emotional self-regulation. So if you have a kid who has a hard time regulating themselves, well, of course, being calm is not going to just be something you can say, well, you just calm down. Anyone try that? Does that work? No? See, that's the thing. These things don't work. That logic isn't working. Yes?
Does anybody else have where you are being calm and you're trying to understand the moment, but that child is trying to goat you, like is trying to make the scene?
That's never had. No one ever had that, right?
I mean,
yes.
but like,
That's
is that
universal.
normal? Is that how they respond? They want to goat you to get that rage?
Sometimes, yeah. Which is why one of the things that you have to know is I can't just give you the answer for that because there's so much proactive work I need to do with you so that we don't get to that place.
I just want to know if anyone else had that.
Yes, I will say you could get a universal yes.
Okay.
Isn't it called like a self-stimulating for the argument? They start up the argument to self-stimulate for the adrenaline to move a little bit.
You know what? That's
or jumping the
sometimes
sinuses in the brain.
Sometimes, but it's not really quite. That's not the answer for all of it. It's really not the answer for all of it. Sometimes, yeah, they do need to get themselves stimulated. It's the itch they need to scratch kind of thing, but that's not the full answer. Yeah. I'll take one more question now, and then I'll finish this, and we'll do more. Did someone else have another question? Yes.
Well, you had just said the hereditary. So I'm almost like, I'll see your ADHD and raise you mine. I mean, it becomes so then your skills are out the window.
Yeah.
So it's.
Yeah. So did you all hear that? She says, I see your ADHD and I'll raise you mine, right? Because it is hereditary, absolutely. It means that you have to, and I support you in this, that there's work you need to do for you too. Like I said, there are a lot of adults out there who did not get the proper treatment. And by treatment, you see, it's education, it's support, it's strategies, it's tools, it's a lot of things. So we all need that. Okay, so they need structure and consistency to reduce some of the stress and chaos. But as I said, what kind of structure, right? We need to really make that specific for the kid. And they need support at the point of performance. What does point of performance mean? It means right here, right now. Okay. Classic example I can tell you in schools. I was consulting in a school 2 months ago, and the child had major speech delays and was working in speech, one-on-one with the speech teacher outside of the classroom. But then in the classroom, nothing was working. Why? Because there was no carryover, because the speech teacher wasn't in the classroom. You sometimes need to support the person where they are. You can't assume that just because you taught them here, they can do it there. Okay? That's support at the point of performance. And as you said over there, they will look to test the limits, so you have to make sure you have them. You have to make sure you have the limits, and you have to be consistent with them. But sometimes you have to be inconsistent with them because you got to parent the child you have, and that's where it gets so confusing, right?
Right.
Right? But if I don't break this rule this time, I've got all these reasons why I have to, and then you end up, right? So that's why you got to really know your kid, and you really have to understand ADHD. So your child's lens, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but ages and stages, what does your child know about ADHD? Right? It's important to realize that kids are Googling these days. Okay? You have to realize that as much as you may want to, for whatever reason, protect your child, for whatever reason. Of course, we all want to protect our children, but may not want to tell them too much. That doesn't mean they're not finding out, and they may be finding out the wrong information. They may be hearing it from their friends. Their friends may be making fun of that kid who has ADHD, not realizing that this kid does too. Okay, and that goes on all the time. So it's really important to think about what is your child's perspective and knowledge of ADHD. You want to teach them about the brain. You want to talk to them about how they feel about having ADHD. And their self-care. What is self-care? Self-care is very simple. Nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Now I can tell you a lot of people say, well, doesn't everyone need that? Absolutely. We all need the proper exercise, nutrition, and sleep. But when you have ADHD, you're more susceptible to those bigger swings when you don't have these things. So you really want to make sure. Also, what is your child's role in their treatment? It depends, of course, on their age, but at some point you want them to gradually develop the responsibility. I get lots of calls from parents whose kids have just somehow flunked out of college. They did great in high school, right? Why did they do great in high school and they're flunking out of college? Because what's not there? Mom. And what was mom's role? Remember I talked about executive function, that front part of the brain? Okay? Your executive function, the nickname for that is the CEO of the brain. And who's the kid's CEO? Mom. And dad sometimes. I don't want to say dad doesn't matter. Okay? So do they know how they learn best? Do they know their rights? Can they advocate for themselves? Here's the thing, guys. Advocating for yourself is a developmental skill. It is not an expectation. You cannot say, well, he should advocate for himself. A lot of times you hear that from the teachers. Well, why doesn't he just come tell me he needs help? Why? Because maybe a million reasons why. But it shouldn't necessarily be his responsibility. Not until we've helped him learn that. And do they see their own interests and talents and passions? Okay? These things have to be nourished. It breaks my heart. These kids have so much homework. All the kids have so much homework, right? And kids with ADHD, very often it takes them so much longer. So don't make the mistake of saying, well, I'm sorry now, you can't, be on the soccer team, or you can't be on this, or you can't be on that. We've got to find a way to let them nourish their talents. It's so important. It's so much of who they are. And let's look, family balance. Well, same kind of thing with kids. You got to make sure you're nourishing that. Marriage and family relationships. I can tell you that the statistics for divorce in families where there are kids with special needs, any kind of special needs, is way off the charts. Okay? Because very often, this is how you're spending your date night. Right? Okay? Or you're going to a restaurant so you can get away from everyone so you can do what? Talk about the kids. Right? Because we got to figure this out. All right? There's a lot of stress and strain that goes on. The other children in the family, we have to pay attention to them too. What's the impact on the siblings? Oh, this is great. You know what? I'm having such a hard time with Johnny. I'm going out tonight. We're both going to go out tonight. Sally, will you watch Johnny? Well, what about poor Sally, who doesn't have ADHD and is now watching her brother? Do you think she has an easier time? Okay? So you got to make sure you spend time with all of the kids in the family. And you got to take care of your self-care. Again, the nutrition, the exercise, and the sleep. The emotional well-being. And you got to make sure that you make time for your friendships and your interests. Okay? I know these kids can be very time-consuming. School connection. School connection, really important. You have to know what your rights are, because if you're going to assume that you're going to go to the school and they're going to tell you all of your rights, I'm not saying they're trying to hide anything. What I'm saying is you need to make sure you know what your rights are, what your child's rights are. And there are lots of resources for that. I can tell you that I have an organization I started a few years ago. It's called Long Island Professionals ADHD Consortium, or LIPAC. And it is made up of professionals from across Long Island, all different kinds of professionals. We've got psychiatrists, psychologists, neuropsychologists, we have pediatricians, we have lawyers, special ed lawyers, we have special ed advocates, we have, of course, ADHD coaches, we have tutors, we have educational therapists, okay? You have to make sure that you know what your rights are, who you can go to, and what services you can get. So never go to a school meeting alone. Why do I say don't go to a school meeting alone? Well, let me preface this by saying I don't mean you have to lawyer up. I don't mean you have to bring an advocate. I mean you need to bring someone who is not intimately related to your child, like a friend or you know, cousin, something like that. But why do I say you should bring someone to a meeting?
Emotion is out of it.
They're going to hear different things, yeah? Someone else said something?
I said support.
Support, yeah. Because what happens is when we're nervous, our ability to hear things is impaired. And those meetings are emotional. So you want to have someone with you who can kind of slow it down, who maybe can take notes, who maybe can remind you of something you wanted to ask or say. All right? So always take someone with you. Keep accurate records. If your child is in elementary school and your kid is, you know, had all the testing going on, guess what? You are going to need that when he applies for college sometimes, okay? College board, the SATs, how many of your kids have gone through the SATs yet? Fun, right? Okay, so here's the thing. The college board is a private corporation. Just because your kid has had a 504 or an IEP their entire school career does not mean that they are going to get those same services, meaning extended time on the SAT, or maybe getting breaks, or maybe getting certain sections read. It doesn't mean they're guaranteed to get those services. So you may need to provide College Board with the support by saying, hey, look, my kid's had this diagnosis, and here's some of the evidence. All right, so always hold on to that. You know why else you need it? Because what happens if your kid decides he wants to go for the GMATs, or the LSATs, or as my niece did, sat for the bar, okay? And she was entitled to, or should be entitled to, extended time on that, but she had to fight for that. And how did she fight? She showed the whole history. So make sure you're keeping your records, make sure you're keeping them in a logical way, all right? Work with and not against your teachers. I shouldn't have to say that, but the fact of the matter is very often we get very frustrated with the teachers. Anyone here? I'm not even going to ask. Gets very frustrated with the schools, okay? I am fortunate in that I do now go into school districts, and I do actually through BOCES, through Nassau, Suffolk, and Western Suffolk BOCES, I do teacher training. And what I find by and large is there are a lot of teachers who really do care, but just don't know any more than you do, okay? When I speak, this is all new for them too. So it's very important that you realize that your teacher may not have the knowledge about ADHD. You can't assume that they are the expert. So you have to work with your teacher. Modifications and accommodations. A lot of kids are entitled to them at school, but they have to know what they are. And you have to know what is possible for them to have. Okay, circle of support. Well, here's the thing. It really does take a village. It takes a lot of different professionals, right, to help support your child. But you have to be the chief and the head coach. But even the head coach needs to get support out there too, all right? And there is support for you. And that's it. There we go. Your goal, remember, is to raise a resilient and confident child. So to do that, you're going to need all of those different pieces to help support you. And then the 10th thing is stay in the present. If you remember at the very beginning, I talked about the executive functions, and I set up to 30% developmentally delayed. So what that means is if you take your child's age and now you subtract about 30%, and again, depending on the child's age and development, that might be where they are, right? So if you're wondering, why can't Johnny pack his backpack like all his buddies do? Because maybe developmentally he's not there yet. But that's why I want you to stay in the present, because they are going to grow. I promise they're going to grow. They're going to learn, they're going to develop. They're going to need some support, but they're going to get there. So remember they have that delay. Keep your expectations real and reasonable. Help them develop their interests and their passions. Very, very important. And let your dreams evolve as they evolve. It's all about the relationship. If you find that your relationship with your child is very contentious, please come see me. Please come do my workshop, because it's all about the relationship. That's why my workshop is called Calm and Connected. Because if we don't have that, we can't help this kid succeed. All right? So, this is called the Wheel of Life, and I have Nina back here is going to hand each of you this, so you don't have to worry about writing that down or anything. Basically, a Wheel of Life is something we as coaches use as a tool. And what you do in anything can be on your wheel. All right? This is just an example of a wheel. But basically what happens is you say, okay, let's say the center is 0, and the outside is 10, meaning I'm very satisfied out here, and I'm not so satisfied in here. You want to look at each of these different areas of your life and say, how am I doing? So you might feel like, okay, you know what? I've got a pretty good level of knowledge. I'm around 8, but diagnosis and treatment, I have no idea what to do. Okay, that might be a lot lower. Your perspective, all of these different areas, you want to see how satisfied are you in each of these different areas. And where you're not feeling satisfied, that's where you're going to go get some support. All right? I'm going to take plenty of questions, but I just do want to mention there are 2 more presentations coming up. You should all have the flyers and everything. Myra Allen over here is going to be speaking on the 15th. She is excellent. She has had umpteen years. She was originally a resource room teacher. She has been a private practitioner for probably about 20 or so years. She's an expert in the field of learning and reading, and she's both a speech pathologist and a reading specialist. So she's going to be talking about the whole connection between your language and reading skills. And then we have Eileen Solomon, who is a clinical and pediatric neuropsychologist. She can talk to you about, well, she's going to be talking to you about anxiety, basically. How do you know when it's the right level of anxiety, and how do you know when it's too much and when you really need to worry? So these are 2 excellent presentations that Allied is sponsoring coming up. And what else?
How about the rainy or snowy day?
And I'm going to take your questions now. I do just want to let you know, if you want to follow up with me, you should all have something that has my email address on it. On my website, which is PTS Coaching, I have a lot of articles. I send out a newsletter every month or so. I'm a little behind right now, but I do send out articles. I don't send out, too many emails, really once or twice a month. I also have a Facebook page, which is PTS Coaching, and I put a lot of current articles on there, things happening in the news, so you may want to check that out, and I don't know, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever those things are. Okay, so at this point I'm going to open it up to questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So we've been at this game for about 7 or 8 years. And
That's good.
so we're moving along. But
Okay.
now we're in middle school. So now is he just a jerky 12-year-old boy, or is it ADHD? So that's where we're at, and it's very oppositional, and it's natural consequences. But school now deploys everything in our district. Everything is through the iPad. So there's no looking over. So it's so difficult to monitor, and I'm a grown-up now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what she's saying is you have a middle schooler and you're wondering, well, how much of this is just his behavior, versus the ADHD? And what I'm going to say is the 2 are so intertwined. They really are so intertwined. And there is so much that you can do through your relationship with him that's going to empower him, because he's got a lot of schooling left in front of him, and he's got a lot of years at home with you, God willing, okay? Maybe not God willing at the moment, but God willing, right? So don't just assume he's being a jerk, as you said, not to use my own words, but those are your words. But yeah, it's not easy for them. It really is that complex. I could read you stories and case studies and all sorts of things that it's not easy being them. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, we have 2 questions over here. First one is, I know my daughter has kind of like a combo package.
Okay.
So we have the ADHD, we have the ODD, slight anxiety, and now we're testing for maybe seizures.
Okay.
To explain some of it, because now she doesn't remember things. Of course, it might be a diversion to not talk about things, or it might actually be because she doesn't remember even cutting her hair the second time.
Okay.
But what are the most common combos that you find with these?
So the most common coexisting conditions, I think, is what you're talking about, okay? I would say one of the most common is learning disabilities. 25 to 50% of kids who have ADHD have some kind of learning disability. Anxiety, I think the statistic is about 38% have anxiety. Depression goes along. There's lots of different things that can go along, and that's why getting a proper diagnosis is so important. It really is.
Okay, and then the second question over here was natural remedies. What is your opinion on natural versus narcotic?
Okay, so by natural remedies, do you have a specific?
No, the focusing is a natural remedy that they're selling online.
Oh, the vitamin, those focus pills, yeah.
No, it's not pills. It's like the liquid drops.
Liquid drops,
Yeah,
okay. So I'm a big believer in looking at the research, okay? And I can tell you that research so far has not backed up many of those alternatives. It's not that I'm going to say don't try certain things, because as a parent, certainly you want to, you want to cover your bases. But I can tell you that in terms of biofeedback and some of the other alternative programs, you have to make sure that these things are peer reviewed, right? Double-blind testing, really high-quality research, and it's just not backing up a lot of the alternatives. I can tell you in terms of diet, all right, gluten-free diet, that's only good if your child has issues with gluten. It's not going to affect a child with ADHD unless they have issues with gluten, okay? Red dye number 2, anyone remember that? That's what they used to talk about, right? Let's get rid of the red dye number 2. And what about sugar, right? Said sugar? Well, here's the thing. Too much sugar in a diet is going to impact any child, any adult, right? A child with ADHD may have a harder time bouncing back and regulating, but it's not because of the diet. Yes?
A question you said about proper diagnosis. My son, when he was just in the first few months of kindergarten, was given a Stroop test as part of his diagnosis. He wasn't a reader. How is that an effective test? And for him to come out with the outcome and saying he does not have, when if he doesn't know how to read the color, he's going to say the color of the word, which is what the desired outcome is.
Well, I would suspect that wasn't the only thing they were using. I would hope that wasn't the only thing they were using. Huh?
A trail way AV and an auditory.
Remember what I said. A diagnosis has to involve many things. It has to involve the testing. It has to involve the conversation, right? That family interview.
Okay.
Okay. It has to involve some information from more than one setting. So you want to really make sure you're getting all of that. Yes.
I guess piggybacking on some of the behavior issues or the behavior situation. What would say would be the best way to determine between a child's interest and them having focus issues? Like, there's instances where our son can focus on something and be on one thing for like an hour and a half because that's like a cardboard box.
Right.
He can play for a cardboard box for an hour and a half. He's doing all those different things for an hour and a half, but then there's other things that he doesn't. So how could it be determined whether it's something he likes or in comparison to focus problems?
Let me make sure they heard over here. Did you guys hear over here?
No.
Basically what he's saying is, how can I tell, tell me if I'm repeating this correctly, how can I tell, is it that he's so interested on this, he can play with a cardboard box for an hour and a half, and other things he may not be paying as much attention to, right? Okay. So here's the thing. Remember I said that ADHD is a deficit in attention regulation? Very often what happens is kids can hyper-focus on something. They're so interested in something, those video games, right? Or as you said, it could be a cardboard box, it could be building, it could be anything. They're so hyper-focused on it that they don't even notice the walls around them have crumbled. That can still be ADHD because they are having a hard time regulating their attention. Does that answer that? Okay. Yes?
Before you had said something about it's mostly genetic, it's mostly inherited.
Mm-hmm.
Can it be developed later on? For example, right now, life, the way we see it, you're watching a television screen, you're reading the words on the bottom if you have closed caption, and then they have The scroll.
Right, the scroll, there's so much going on.
What's going on in the world? Can that actually cause the deficit disorder?
Okay, so here's the thing. Am I getting a hint? Do we need to, you winding down? I don't know whether the lights are flickering as a message or not. Okay, so here's the thing. Remember what I said at the beginning. ADHD is a neurobiological disorder. You cannot develop ADHD. You are born with it. However, having said that, people hit the wall at different ages. Okay? Some kids hit the wall once they get to elementary school. And they're told that now they have to sit still in kindergarten. Some kids hit the wall in middle school. Sometimes in high school, sometimes in college, and sometimes, guess what? When they got married. When they, got that job that they've been wanting all this time, and now they have to do certain things. So it's not that they develop ADHD, it's that their coping skills are no longer matching their environment and their expectations.
That has to do with age also?
It can be age. It can be age. Yeah, I'm going to take a few more questions. I'm going to stick around, but listen, I know some of you have babysitters and need to leave. Please don't feel rude if you do get up. I will understand. Okay? And if anyone does have questions, I just want to say, as I said, I will stay around. If anyone does want to register for my workshop, if you let me know this week, I will give a 5% discount to anyone that is here tonight. I do have some things up there just that I like to make available. There's a book that I contributed to that's up there that's available. And also, sorry? Oh, the book is $20.
How much on the workshop?
The workshop is, it's a 7-session workshop. Each session is an hour and a half. It's 7 weeks, and it's $4.90 for one person. It's $6.90 for a couple, or if you bring just a significant other person. Sometimes people bring their, the grandmother or housekeeper or whoever. So it's $4.90 and $6.90.
Where do you have it?
I have the workshops in Melville. It's right off of, it's right on Route 110, right off of the Northern State. Okay? And what else did I want to tell everyone about that? Workshop, book. Oh, the book. I do have a book coming out, but it's not out yet on parenting. But the other thing I have up there is folders. And the reason I bring these folders, I do not make a lot of money on these folders, guys, but they're the best folders I've ever found, and they're not sold in stores. You can buy them in bulk online. So you may want to take a look at those. There's a 10-pocket folder that's great for kids in middle school and high school. And there's 2-pocket folders. They're pretty much indestructible, and it's really nice for organizing materials. Okay. Questions? Yes, you had I'm sorry, back there, you had a question.
Our son tends to get really frustrated when we ask him to do something, or if something doesn't work in his favor, playing a video game, he gets so mad and gets really emotional about it. And he actually has found a way, I don't know if this is what it is, but to self-regulate, where he'll literally get so frustrated and be and then he'll go up to his room, and I don't know, he might spend 5 or 10 minutes there, and then, he just kind of walks back downstairs and is just normal. And so, we've been told that it's because he's kind of actually finding a way to deal with his frustration on his own. Now, my question is, do we acknowledge what happened? You know what I mean? Or be supportive, or kind of...
I think the fact that he figured out how to regulate himself, that's probably really great. And what's great about acknowledging that is there's a way you can acknowledge that that's going to be supportive to say, hey, look what you could do here. Let's figure out how you could do that elsewhere. How can we transfer that over there? So, yeah, a lot of times people say, oh, let sleeping dogs lie. Let's not talk about it because then it might go away, kind of thing. But I would say it's how you talk about it and how you help him frame what that wonderful skill is that he's learned for himself.
How old is he?
Yeah.
7.
I'm not going to cut anything short. Cindy's welcome to stay. You guys are all welcome to stay. I just want to thank everybody for coming before everybody starts to leave. On behalf of Allied Physicians Group, thank you for coming. Thank you, Cindy. Absolutely. And we do have some dessert for people on the way out.
Thank you.